So welcome, everybody. It's nice to see so many people coming to the Police Commission meeting. This is wonderful. We do have, I do have a sheet here of people that would like to speak, so if anyone's not on here and you'd like to, just raise your hand, let me know. So let's get the meeting started. Do we have any additions or modifications to the agenda? Anybody? No? Okay. So the next part is the public forum. And what we're going to do is Commissioner Hart is going to use her phone to time so that you have some uninterrupted time to give us your comments. So we'll do 4 minutes, and you don't have to use all of that, or you can. So why don't we have Christina McLaughlin?
One month ago, I was walking down Church Street and I spotted a group of young African-American men consoling each other. As I passed them, one of the boys sighed and said, "My mom didn't send me to Vermont to get frisked by the Secret Service like Finn Brown. She was trying to get me away from all of that." In a climate where existing as a black man can be a death sentence, to hear such a dejected statement about our own police force was deeply disturbing. My name is Christina McLaughlin, and I'm a junior at the University of Vermont. Although I am white passing, I am a person of color. When I was growing up, my Filipino grandparents visited infrequently, and on one summer visit when I was 7, my grandmother grasped my hands, began to cry, and told me, "You've gotten too dark. Your life will be hard now." Watching the body camera footage of Finn Brown being told again and again that he was dramatic, that he wasn't actually a person of color, and that he was injecting race into a situation where race doesn't need to be involved, turned my stomach and broke my heart. For people of color, race is involved in every decision that we make, and that's a fact that needs to be understood, especially by our governing forces. As stated in the 2017 Use of Force report, African Americans made up 15% of the total arrests in Burlington, but represented 18% of arrests where force was used. Furthermore, when force was used, people of color were 10% more likely to be threatened with a weapon than their white counterparts. These disparities are noteworthy and indicative of racial bias. While the Burlington Police Department may not have had the jurisdiction to interfere with the actions of Secret Service agents, it's absolutely your duty to ensure that your pledge to protect and serve applies to every member of our community, no matter their skin color. I applaud the statements by Chief Del Pozo that you made after the fact, but those sentiments need to be backed by the actions of every officer so that we can truly ensure that no child, no matter their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, nor any other factor, has to go through this. I'm positive that every one of the officers of the Burlington Police Department joined the force with a passion to support their community, and that is why it's essential to provide them with the correct tools and training to achieve that goal. While the major implicit bias training conducted last year was an excellent start, the gross insensitivity shown to Finn Brown proves that it was not enough. According to research presented by Dr. Stephanie Seguino, short but frequent trainings followed by impact monitoring is the most effective way to address bias. I urge you to adjust the training methods for officers so they can better empathize with the needs of a highly diverse city. Burlington has the opportunity to lead the nation in making our communities comfortable and safe for every citizen, and I truly hope that you'll take it. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Could we actually get a copy of what you wrote too?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just give this to you?
Yeah, I would love that, but I'll come to you. Okay. Trish O'Kane.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Hi, I teach environmental studies at UVM, and I teach a class called Birding to Change the World that pairs our undergraduates as birding mentors with kids at Flynn Elementary and Hunt Middle School. My students are paired with the children for the whole semester, the pairs, and sometimes as long as a year. Every Wednesday, I take my students to the schools in my neighborhood in the New North End where I live, and we spend 3 hours together in the afternoon walking for miles, playing and learning about our wild neighbors, the feathered, the furred, the scaled, and the finned. 2 weeks ago, when the sun came out, our kids found a pregnant garter snake near the bike path. After much screaming and jumping up and down, their college mentors convinced the kids that the snake was not dangerous, and then they lined up to hold and pet her. Many of the kids in our program are new Americans. Over half of them are children of color. One of the goals of UVM's program is to get more of our kids outside, playing in their own neighborhood. Another goal is to eventually attract them to college. Tomorrow we're bringing them to campus for the end of the semester traditional campus tour and party with cake and ice cream. Tomorrow between 2 and 5 p.m., the screams and laughter of children will hopefully amuse many a UVM student as they begin to prepare for finals. Both of our goals, getting the kids outside and getting them to college, are based on our kids feeling welcomed and loved in their own neighborhood and on our campus. And this is why I'm here tonight. The children in our program in the schools know what's going on in our city. They often ask their college mentors about politics and sometimes about racism. What happened to 16-year-old Finn Brown sends the wrong message to our kids. In my class, I make all my college student mentors watch a 2-minute YouTube called Birding While Black. It's by a friend of mine, Dr. Drew Lanham, one of the only African-American ornithologists in the nation. On the YouTube, Dr. Lanham gives rules, quote, for the black birder. Rule number 3 is, quote, never wear a hoodie, ever, unquote. I ask you to please watch this YouTube, Birding While Black, after you leave here tonight, and think about who has the privilege of walking outside without being harassed. Never mind with binoculars. If a 16-year-old African-American kid is harassed by the Secret Service in broad daylight on the street in Burlington, how is any child of color supposed to feel safe anywhere? Burlington is changing, Vermont is changing, but not enough and not fast enough. Please increase bias training for police so that all of our children can feel safe outside, in the street, or in the woods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trish, could I have a copy of that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. We look forward to watching that YouTube. Stephanie Sequino.
Hi there. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. I'm Stephanie Seguino. I teach at UVM and do research on racial disparities in policing, and thank you all also for the work you do. I know how much time it takes, and we really appreciate you representing community values as regards the role of policing in our community. I wanted to talk about a couple of things tonight. First, to relay to you an incident with regards to a police stop of an African-American woman in Burlington in March, and the impact on her, but also some of the data issues that emerge from that. I wanted to start out by saying that Chief Pozo and I have talked about this, and I think he has a handle on this, and we've had a very cooperative relationship, and so that's not my concern, but more to educate you about some of these issues and some of the data issues. The person that who called me about this incident is at UVM and was stopped on Pearl Street, and I believe it was South Union, and she feels like the officer identified her because she was at a stop sign, and he followed her through the Old North End neighborhoods to her home near the Boys and Girls Club. And when he stopped her and spoke to her, he told her the reason that he stopped her was that she failed to turn on her blinker at more than 100 feet from the stop sign. So I'm relaying her experience of this to you. She told me that she has a white roommate, and that, so let me leave that aside for a moment, and the officer repeatedly commented to her that her vehicle was from out of state, and she was wondering why she was in Vermont. He said this more than once. She said that he was questioning her and getting information on her, and her white roommate came home and was concerned about seeing the police car there. And when she came to the big glass window and looked out the window, the person who I spoke to said that the officer immediately gave her back her documents and sent her on her way, but without any piece of paper. So that stop was not recorded by the police. I know that Chief Del Pozo will fill you in on this because he said that they do audits of stops of this kind. But I wanted to just reiterate the importance of every stop being recorded, because if stops are not recorded, such as this one, it can lead to inaccuracies in the data. And I want to just add to you, I get these phone calls not only from Burlington, but from other parts of the state as well. People relay their experience to me. And I'll just say that this person was traumatized. She came to Vermont thinking it was a very different environment than where she lived. She said she is hesitant to go out at night now, and has spent a lot of time with sleepless nights as a result of this, and has said that she has been traumatized by this experience. And she said that 2 weeks later she was also followed by the police in a similar manner. And when she pulled into her driveway, that officer did not stop her, but she nevertheless was followed again. So let me just make a few comments about some of the data issues. And again, I've discussed them with Chief Del Pozo, but I thought it would be useful to share them with you. The state requires a certain amount of data to be shared publicly. There are, however, some additional pieces of data that would be helpful to us in tracking racial disparities in policing. One of those is that we don't have good estimates of the driving population. The only way that we can assess that is through accident data. And the last time that I was able to get access to accident data at the state level, 32% of all accidents did not record the race of the driver. So although that's the best tool for understanding whether there are racial disparities in stops or not, there is a lot of missing data. And I have not seen Burlington's data for the last few years, but I want to simply put out a call to make sure that that data is accurately collected so that we can accurately measure disparities in traffic stops.
Dr. Seguino, your time is up, but I'm not saying stop talking, but just be aware.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, I'll just take another minute. The other thing that I have asked Chief Del Pozo for, and he's looking into, is giving us more detailed data about contraband. Contraband can be as little as a 16-year-old with a pack of cigarettes, for example, or an open container. And the police officers I talk to justify search rate disparities between blacks and whites based on the concern that people of color may be carrying drugs. And so contraband data would help us verify whether that is in fact an accurate assessment or not. When I analyzed Vermont State Police data for 2016, what we found that of all of the stops that resulted in heroin, opioids, and cocaine being found, 100% of those drivers were white. And so I think it would be important for us to understand this in Burlington as well. In addition to that, the state in which the automobile is registered in, I think, would be important, because it does seem to be that there is a tendency to believe that it is out-of-state drivers that are particularly those people that are carrying drugs. And so I would encourage that even though the state does not require it, that we be able to get access to those data for Burlington. And finally, thank you for your allowing me just a few minutes extra. Let me just share with you some of the data from Burlington. In 2015, the search rate of black drivers was 3% compared to 1% of white drivers. Every year it has increased, so that in 2017, 7% of black drivers have been searched compared to 1% of drivers. So my experience of Chief Del Pozo is that he is working very hard on these issues, but we are not getting traction. And just to give you the example of 2017, blacks are roughly 5.5% of the Burlington population, but they're almost 10% of drivers stopped. And that percentage has also been rising over time. So I think it is important for us to redouble our efforts. Thank you very much, and I will type this up and send it to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I know we had some people come in a little later. Does anybody else have any Okay.
So it's Dave Hartnett and I live in the New North End. I did attend the city council meeting last night that was held in conference room 12, and it was interesting, and I'm glad I went. And I think I clearly understand the actions by this police chief in requesting the information that he did request from the medical examiner. Although I think there was a question last night that was asked that I think could have really maybe ended this whole conversation about, was it right or wrong what we did? And I think the question was, if we had to do it over again, would we do it the same way? And I think Councilor Tracy asked that question. And I was hoping for an answer somewhat like this, that given this case, and it's so different than the Phil Burnett case and the Phil Brennan case, they're so far apart of the two incidents of those incidents that this was very complicated, this case, right? And when the medical examiner came back with his findings, I think the chief said it best that he quite didn't really understand it either as well, right? And so how would the general public or even the officer and his family or Doug Kilburn and his family would even understand that, right? And so I think we should have taken the approach to say, your office, would you come forward, please, publicly? Would you hold a press conference? Would you explain to the people of Burlington what this means? And I think that's what we should have done differently. I don't think the request should have came from either the mayor's office or our own police department, because just the perception of that looks like, hey, look, these guys were, trying to ask a favor to get done and maybe skew this report. And I don't think that was the intention of all of this police force or even the mayor's office. I just think we have an incredible police force. They do incredible work. I hear the stories, and they're so discouraging to hear those stops. But I see so many good stories in the New North End on Sunday mornings when there's officers across the street playing football with all the kids in the neighborhoods, including the new Americans, and explaining to them the sport and taking the time with them and bringing them over to the store to have creamies with them. And then just the other day, a female had broken down across the street from us, a new American, driving her van. She was in the middle of traffic. Not only did he help get her out of traffic, but he actually put her in a cruiser, brought her down to the station, filled her tire with air, and brought her back. There's so for all the stories that I hear that are so concerning, I think there's so many good stories out there in Burlington that we don't hear about, that we see. And it's unfortunate they don't get told as well. And so I just hope, this incident with the Kilburn family, which I, for the record, know very well. They live in the New North End. They're just a great family and have been a big part of the New North End. I just hope, something like this is that we can get over this, come together, and find a solution through this, because it is tragic not only for the officer, but it's tragic for the Kilburn family. It's tragic for this community. And I just don't think there was any ill intentions by this department or by the mayor's office. I think actually they thought they were probably doing the right thing. I think there was a better way that we could have got there. And I hope if that question gets asked again, I hope we have a different response, at least from the mayor's office. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Okay, anybody else? Hi, and I think you came in late.
I
so
did.
If you could just say your name, and we're just doing 4 minutes, so Shireen will let you know when that's coming in. If you need to take an extra couple minutes, that's fine too.
Thank you so much. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a resident of Burlington. I live over in the First Ward. I've been here in Burlington now for about 4 months, living in Burlington. I've been residing in central Vermont for the last 10 years. I'm a retired Army officer, and my profession is cybersecurity. I am the executive director and founder of Justice for All, a racial justice organization that pursues racial justice across the criminal justice system. And we've been working actively across central Vermont and affected change significantly with what I categorize as being probably some of the most significant legislation in Vermont history in Act 54 with the Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice System Advisory Panel. Act 9, the Racial Equity Director, who will be seated any day now, and the Racial Equity Panel. Right now, we're pursuing, and we put forward PR2, which is a constitutional amendment to ensure clarity on removal of slavery from the state constitution. And there are various other pieces of legislation that we're moving. We engage in quite a bit of community outreach activities, some of which has occurred here in the Burlington community just over the last several months. Although I can sympathize with what David just stated. As an African American in the community, I have a different perspective. And I think that it would be nice to sit before you and tell you that I would prefer to defer to and providing accolades for all of the good things that I'm sure that law enforcement does here in the community, and I know they do. That's not productive in this case. Okay. What's productive in this case is accountability and responsibility. What's productive in this case is transparency. What's productive in this case is trust. What's productive in this case is the ability for community to be able to look at the law enforcement and to view them with an adequate level of legitimacy. Okay. That's what's important, because that's where cooperation comes from in our communities, and that's how we make our communities more safe. One thing I would put forward is out of respect for Brandon, who's he's probably going to fall out of his chair, but I'd count him as a friend. I would say that I know that you try, sir, and I do understand. I have a sense of the challenge that you have there. There's a lot to do. However, the perceptions rather of the community are critically important here. And when there are certain demographics of the community that begin to feel as though they cannot trust the police, then we got problems, okay? So the solution is how do we work our way through that? And I think that's what everybody's struggling with, to include myself, and I think we should struggle together, and I think that's where this all comes together. One of the things I would put, just in closing, before the commission, is one of the policies that we've been working on at a statewide level, and Brandon and I have had conversations about this, localizing is the whole concept of use of force. There's currently, you might note this, there's a bill in the House called H-478. I beg your pardon, that's the one on reparations. We'll talk about that next time. There's a bill in the House and the Senate. I think the Senate one is S-119, and the one in the House I can get back with you in a communication. I can't remember the name of it, the designation rather, but it is a appropriate use of force race data collection. This would be consistent with all 78 agencies across the state's current responsibilities, going back to what Stephanie Seguino was talking about earlier with data collection. Under Title 20, 2366, this would be consistent with those data collection responsibilities that all law enforcement have. It would just be an additional item. We know that the Burlington Police Department used force against black people at 18% of the time that force was used in a report released by this department in January of 2017. We just heard that only 5% of our community is black. So if we do the math, we see that there's a 3 times, I'd ask Stephanie to help me there with those numbers, but 3 times the rate we're having force used against us, okay? It would take very little to surmise that the probability of force being used against a person is going to be directly proportional with the rate at which they're having interaction with law enforcement. We've already established that we have a pretty high rate of interaction with law enforcement. So one of the recommendations that I would put forward is that you would strongly consider, in conjunction with the council, and I would strongly recommend maybe outside sourcing, is do the work, figure out how Burlington can lead the state in race data collection, and by doing so, in collecting use of force data. as a part of the data set that they currently collect. Number two,
Just to, you're fine, you can finish, but we're way
thank you.
past your time.
Number two, revisit the policy. Take a closer look at the use of force policy. We are looking at your use of force policy right now. We encourage you to take a look at it as well. We encourage you to take a deep dive into it, not just in light of what has just recently occurred, but what our standard should be, and the standard that we want to lead with as a city. And finally, training, appropriate use of force, training, de-escalation, and cross-cultural awareness training. Let's get serious about that. Let's create the standard. Let's lead. Let's not wait for the Criminal Justice Training Council. I figured you liked that. But let's lead by example. And hopefully what this will do for us is it'll put us in a position where we won't have to be having these conversations again. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to engaging with you and moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Commissioner?
Yes.
Would you mind if I acknowledge some of those comments, or?
Let me just see if
Oh,
anybody
please,
else.
please.
Are there any other folks that would like to speak tonight? No? Okay, so before Chief Del Pozo does that, I just want to thank everybody. I want to acknowledge all of you for coming tonight. Sometimes it's just us sitting here without the public, and we're here to serve the public. So thank you very much, and we take what you say to heart, and it's very much appreciated. So come again. And actually, Chief Del Pozo, if it's okay, we could move right into the chief's report.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So first, I'd like to echo Commissioner Ash's sentiments about the folks coming today. I think we benefit from having more people rather than less. I also think that we need to deal with these issues, which are very difficult issues, head on, and not dance around them. The only thing I benefit from with the short commission meeting is just getting home a little early. But I mean, literally, that's it. We miss opportunities otherwise to communicate with each other. So just so you know who we have in the room, we take listening to you seriously. Pretty much at every meeting, we have a representative from the labor union to report directly back to the constituency about the concerns. They're there, I think, well over half the meetings, if not 3/4. I also have my data analyst, my policy analyst, we have an epidemiologist, we have my command staff as well. So these folks are taking this information back, and we're contending with it. So it's not just a check the box monthly meeting, unless you don't show up. Then we're just checking a box. So thank you for talking about the Finn Brown case. You know, that was difficult body camera footage to watch in a lot of ways. And I think that what I came away with was two distinctions. One is I think the Secret Service, I won't comment on their actions except to say I think to some extent they're there for what they are and they speak for themselves. You know, the accounts that they offered, a lot of the worries you had were things that they said. I found that it was difficult to get them to come back and offer an accounting of what they'd done. They kind of just said, we're the Secret Service, call our Boston office. And I'm not making a secret of that. That's, you know, in fact, what they said. But I feel like if they had to sit in front of an audience and offer a direct accounting, it might be different. I felt like our cops, as far as their actions for the most part, were sound. They actually challenged the Secret Service. They said, if a person showed up at your door like this, dressed like you were dressed, like, what the hell would you do? That's almost a quote. However, what we're still dealing with in America and in our policing is an inability to understand and take seriously how another person sees it, especially if they're of a different race. And what we end up doing is challenging each other's feelings. I think one of the things you talked about was our officers saying, this is not about race, or don't make this about race, or I'm telling you this isn't about race. And I think it's Susan Sontag, and I've used this quote a lot, but she said something that always stuck with me, which is you can't ask a person to change a feeling. And I also think when it comes to race, it's you can't understand why a person of another race has that feeling, whether you disagree with it or not. And it's not your place to challenge it. And, you know, one of the things that I think, especially up the further north you get in America, where, you know, you're further from these like hotbeds of racial strife and tension, is, well, I'll just say this. I went to the National Lynching Memorial 2 months ago in Montgomery, Alabama, and also the museum for, it's a Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Slavery Museum. And that was part of something I did at the Vera Institute. And I always had this idea at one level or not, but, one level of consciousness, but I was hit in the head with watching the timeline, how slavery was replaced by lynching blended into segregation, and now we're dealing with issues of incarceration. And it occurred to me when you look at the timeline of the last lynching in America that's documented properly and known was in the 80s, right? And up till the 50s, it was quite common. And then segregation was going on all through this time, and then there's also de facto segregation happening even now. And this is the lived experience of people, right? So if you're a police officer who grew up, middle class and grew up with a pretty tranquil life, you can't understand that people's parents and grandparents and themselves have lived with these things. And I try to tell my officers, I try to convey that experience to them, and I think a lot of them get it, but it's fruitless for us to tell other people how they ought to feel about race. It's wrong. And it's also counterproductive. I just think we need to do our jobs fairly and conscientiously and with as little or no bias as possible and acknowledge other people's feelings. So thank you for bringing that up. Secondly, Stephanie Seguino, Professor Seguino, and I think we've been one of the first people I called before I even got this job. I remember I was in Cold Spring, New York on the phone with Dr. Seguino talking about car stop race data. And I hope we disagree about things and methods and stuff, but we have you could pipe in if you disagree, a very healthy relationship about we don't think our methods are inaccessible to each other. We don't say, oh, you're a doctor of economics, so I can't possibly understand what you're doing or question your techniques or wonder what the evidentiary standards are. I'd say, can you explain them to me? And then I'll offer another hypothesis, and you'll come back and say, no, I agree or disagree. So, but I think what we've come to and iteratively is a pretty good understanding of what good data and good evidence is. I think that should be the practice throughout Vermont. So, number one, we do audits of our data, and we've looked at cases in which we don't have a piece of paper affixed to a car stop. And we found that even in those cases, and I said this to you before the meeting, 60% of the time, the officer has nonetheless put the driver's name in and put a race in so we know what race that person was and we can put it into the bigger pool. But we do want better compliance. We've also found sometimes that cops are doing things like Uber checks to see if someone has an Uber sticker, and they call that a car stop, but they don't file paperwork on it because they're just doing an ordinance check. I'm not trying to minimize that, right? What Dr. Seguino said in some ways is unassailable. We still have these definite disparities. The disparities have, in some ways, have decreased over time, and in other ways not. Depends on what you're measuring. The ones that have persisted or grown are real. Although the total amount of car stops has gone down 40% in the last few years, the disparities among the remaining ones still exist. Some of that is explained by whether you have a valid license or not, but not all of it. And I will say, because I don't want to, I've taken a lot more than 4 minutes, but Chief's report. I can go on for hours. All right, so I will say the legalization of marijuana, and in fact, Nancy, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but the legalization of marijuana has had, in last July, has had a huge effect on our stop and search outcomes. Is there anything, instead of having it come from me, you can share off the cuff, or? Our searches have been going down. In 2018, there were 28 searches total. All races? Of all races. And almost all of those occurred before July 1. I think there was 4 that happened after July. And then how many this year? This year we haven't seen any searches. And if you go and you look, and we'll be reporting this out soon, the number one cause for suspicion in a search was marijuana related, and the number one contraband found was some form of marijuana. So it seems like in that case, legalization of cannabis, of marijuana, of THC, will profoundly affect that. But then we can turn and focus on other forms of disparity, even if the search disparities start to collapse. So, I have other charts and graphs, but maybe we can talk about them in camera. I will say we did look at the stop you were talking about with the student. I found that our review of the body camera is fairly accurate. There are some perceptions about frequency or duration that may be off, but I'm prepared to give her a copy of the body camera footage. And I think that when you talk about the reasons for stopping someone, like not signaling 100 feet before an intersection, I think one of the foundations of fairness in policing is if the reasons we use to do coercive things like stop people are reasons that everybody thinks apply equally and are fair to everyone. So, you know, we always have in our pocket the ability to pull out a piece of traffic law and say, look, you signal less than 100 feet from the intersection. Like, it's the law and I can stop you. I'd like that to correspond with a legitimate public safety interest and not just be something that we pull out of our pocket as a technicality. So we do need to get to the bottom of that, right, and assure that people aren't subject to like one of 1,000 traffic laws as a reason they could be stopped at any time. And we do care about that. So that is something that like you'd related to me that the student is going to be back at the end of the summer and is interested in following up. And the body camera footage of the stop is available at any time. Lastly, by way of update, in the next week or two, this goes with parity and the criminal justice system is something that Mark would be interested in. We have a pretty, and by the way, the calls for better data, like I just, all about what the right benchmarks are and out of state versus it's all great stuff. Like I have nothing but excitement about formulating the right evidentiary standards and figuring out what's going on. It's sort of, in some ways, like we found that the criminal justice system is a black box once you get past arrests. Like we know who's in jail. We know what conviction records people have. We know who we're arresting. But a little bit, not so? Mark is...
It's tough getting
right.
We kind of know who's in jail. We kind of know why they're in there.
So thanks. So I agree, right? It's murky. We sent an employee to the last 1,640 arraignments that the city of Burlington has conducted with charges that we've leveled against people. So, Nancy, that's what, like a year and a half, or how long?
Yeah, since September 2017.
Since September 2017, we've sent a person to watch maybe some people were out sick once or twice, or a few times, but pretty much every single criminal court arraignment for a Burlington arrest. So that's 1,640 arraignments. We created a data set that has the defendant, the defendant's gender, the defendant's race, the defendant's age, the top charge, whether bail was set, whether conditions were set, whether the person showed up, and who the judge was. So it's a very, very robust data set. We just mailed it to the judiciary for preliminary comment, but we anticipate doing two things: releasing a preliminary report to the public and releasing the data set to the public. One of the things that we've done is anonymize the judges. The idea is not to go after particular judges. I don't think there's a lot of variation, actually, in any case, but to bring accountability and clarity to the second phase in our arrest process.
Can you say the data that's collected again? I'm sorry. So you've got gender, race, age.
The defendant's name, which is,
Yep.
the defendant's race, the defendant's age, the defendant's, the top charge, the defendant's gender, whether the defendant showed up or not, whether a warrant was issued or not, whether conditions were imposed or not, whether bail was imposed or not, and how much.
And
Does that
so
sound right,
do you
Nancy?
also track the police department, the arresting department, or anything?
No, it's
or
just Burlington. So
It's-
these are just
so, okay, so it's
1,640
just
Burlington
Burlington.
arrests.
Okay.
Do you put down the conditions?
Do we track the actual conditions?
The conditions are recorded for the public data. I think I number of conditions.
So I just think it's. We were curious, you hear, and also there was a change in bail law in the middle of this, wasn't there? So we also wanted to see if the change in the bail law had an effect on the resulting bail. Turns out it does. It'll be in the report. Please.
Is there so with the judges, is there an anonymized identifier that would allow you to track?
Yeah, like Judge 1 through 12.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, at one.
Can I just follow up on that question?
Yeah, please.
It's just like the state police, ultimately, there's a way to get back to the individual.
Yeah.
It's not public, but it's for administrative purposes.
Right.
Is that the same case with the judge?
I mean, I wouldn't say it would be difficult. You're saying that I have no way of knowing who the judge is? Like, yeah, there's a way to.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm just asking, at the end of the day, do you have a way of knowing? Yeah. Do you have
Yeah, we see I mean, listen, to be candid, we send an employee and they see the judge, right? I mean, they see a judge sitting there, and they know who that judge is.
I got that, but
Right.
the answer to the question is, what? Do you have a way of knowing who the judge is if you go back and look at the data?
Yes.
Okay.
But the goal is, I mean, the goal of the study is to look at a systems level approach and see if there's disparities within this, even within.
Part of the system.
No, I understand, and you know, we'll be able to assess that, and ultimately, these are public records, right? Any person can go and do this, so,
Yeah, and just really quickly, I'm not suggesting that
Yeah.
we all know.
right.
Okay. I was just
But is there a way of knowing? Yeah. No, thank you. No, my pleasure. And then lastly, you know, Mark Hughes pointed out that we published the use of force report, what is it now, almost 2 years ago?
still over 2 years.
Right, which is, for Vermont, the most comprehensive and wide-ranging one in Vermont. But it has been 2 years. We're dealing with some force issues right now. We will be producing another report shortly, and we'll be producing an interim report as well. So we do take that seriously, and it is time, and we do have the data, and we will be introducing it. So that's what we have as far as those issues are concerned. Much more benignly, would you make an announcement about the community barbecue, Laura?
May 7th, so a week from today, we'll be having our annual community barbecue. I think it's the 6th. And it's going to be adjacent to Edmond, so it's intended to be kind of a block party. We're going to be blocking one block on South Union between Main and King. And we'll have various demonstrations, a drone demo, a canine demo, and then we'll have obviously a barbecue, we'll have Ben and Jerry's. We have a lot of sponsors. City Market is donating some salads and things, and a lot of community partners will be there handing out information, street games, and then a lot of partner agencies there with their vehicles and trucks. So please come 4 to 7 on the 7th, right by Edmonds.
I see a note here I made about use of force policy. I think that's important. We will be revisiting our use of force policy. We will be seeking the input of the Police Commission and the guidance of the Commission, as well as input from the community. One of the things that I think has occurred to us is that our training, I believe, has outpaced our written policy, and that we have a policy that dates back to about 2010. Our training has evolved a lot since then, and I feel, if you've asked me, I've sat at this seat and said, if I have a choice between a pilot in a program or a training and revising policy, I go for the action rather than the policy. But I think there's a lack of congruence here now that needs to be addressed, because you know, we've really gone heavy into a lot of de-escalation training. About a month ago, prior to any of the current events, every police department in this county, through a collaboration with us in South Burlington, became certified instructors in the Police Executive Research Forum's National De-Escalation Curriculum. It's a curriculum we piloted, we helped develop. It's a curriculum I've helped train on. And not only did we originally train all of our officers about 1.5 years, 2 years ago in it, but we are now, all of us, so it's Burlington, South Burlington, Winooski, Colchester, and UVM, are instructors in it. And it emphasizes things like de-escalation. It emphasizes things like minimizing force outcomes. We also put a lot of capital and training effort into a vehicle that has a whole array of less than lethal techniques. But what we're finding is that when you go into our policy, a lot of the expectations in the training are not mirrored in the policy. So if we have a question that we want to point to about performance, we can point to the training, but the policy is what empowers us to make demands and to hold ourselves accountable. And so, you know, I've spoken about this with the union when it comes to questions about officer conduct, and I think we will be seeking to address that, and it will focus on putting our de-escalation requirements into the written policy. So I guess that concludes the. That concludes the chief's update. Thank you. Please.
Great.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks, Mark.
So last month, this isn't anything, last month, we had a community member ask about push notices in Nixle.
Right.
And I think after that, we had the recent homicide.
Right.
Right, just within a week or 2 weeks. And so I know that she had come here right after a previous homicide on Green Street.
Right. Or shooting on Clark Street.
Shooting,
That
yes.
person is still in a coma, so yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
So, did we do anything differently in response or any kind of notices in response to this homicide, this recent homicide?
Right,
terms
so,
of notices.
and I know, Commissioner Hart sent a thoughtful email about maybe there's a lack of, maybe we still don't have complete agreement, Ms. Todd and I, about what the frequency and stuff of the notices. So I'm slated to meet Andrea Todd next week. Laura was out on vacation, so I was crippled for a week, but we will work out that understanding between she and I. But one of the things we did do was put out a homicide update over Front Porch Forum. So one of the bits of consensus we came away with is that I view Nixle as, and I've said this, and I'm saying it for the new audience. Please, like, you don't have to participate. Has anyone ever heard of Nixle? Right? I mean, you're younger than me. Let's face it. Like, you haven't heard of Nixle. Nixle, it was this social media platform that was developed for use by police when police were like afraid of Twitter and afraid of Facebook. It was a strict push notification that was easy for cops to manage. I think it's great for parking bans and crises and floods. I think that we could do a better job of putting more of our press releases as PDFs online. What we're hoping to do is use Nixle, again, for parking bans, spring cleanup, floods, catastrophes, and then use Front Porch Forum for important notifications to the community.
And that's what you had said last month, so we did do that.
We did, in
for this-
fact, do that. We sent out a community, a citywide notification about the
Right,
homicide.
And just so I understand, you have to have Nixle to get those.
Mm-hmm.
So are we still gonna put it on Front Porch Forum,
Yeah, no, I would like Front Porch Forum to be our primary means of alerting people to things.
Yeah, just know, and I did reach out to Front Porch Forum to get clarity. He can do 4 to the community. There's, I think, about 21 wards. He can do 4 a month, and I can do 4 months. So there is
That's
a limit.
8
So-
there to the whole city.
To the whole city.
But to individual communities, like parts of the city, it's limitless. So if you're just looking for a targeted notification, there's no stop to that. And I think that the constituency that Ms. Todd talks about is real, but it's getting smaller. The people who really rely on Nixle and were accustomed to it is getting smaller, and as a platform, it's shrinking. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up to make sure, to see if we had done the Front Porch Forum.
Oh no, we did.
That's
we did.
great.
Yeah.
Which she was happy with.
Yes. Yeah. She wrote an email thanking us. So.
Okay. Any other commissioners have any questions for Chief Del Pozo? Pardon?
I'll save it for section 6.
Okay.
I actually have a quick question. Did we ever reach out to the Boston field office of Secret Service and tell them what the effect on our community was? Or is it just a waste of time?
No. I mean, Assistant Special Agent in charge, Tom Baker, is the supervisor out of that office for here. He drove up here and spent a day and a half here as a result of this incident. You'll see this again and again, right? You had different levels of government. The feds say, this is an ongoing investigation. We do not comment on the investigation. We will have no comment until it's over if we comment, right? Because sometimes they make arrests and they don't even comment. That's their policy, period. We see it differently. So he said exactly what I expected him to say, because it's what the federal government traditionally says, which is they have no comment about ongoing investigations or personnel matters. He was very respectful. He acknowledged that people might be alarmed by the comments that his agents made. He acknowledged that they need to realize that not only are they on camera being filmed, but they're interacting with members of the public, and they have to be accountable for that. But beyond that, said to me he didn't comment, in any other way. But that's not different than other interactions I've had with the federal government.
We'll ask now, since we're asking these questions now. So there was some concern as well, a question about how it is that the police department decides which arrest information to publicize and what information to publicize, whether that's traditional media or social media. So is there a standard for what the threshold is that an arrest needs to kind of clear in order for that to be publicized widely, or?
Yeah, I mean, I know that if you're asking about Mr. Fife's question about, and I think it's narrowly related to, we had a social media message about a mother and daughter team arrested for selling fentanyl. So one of the tests is, is it a very serious incident that the public needs to know about? So the homicide, right? We'd we broadcast the arrests of. Also, if it's of great, not a serious incident, but of great public interest, like when we had, for example, 300 windows broken over the course of a year and a half by a team driving around at night that really, really vexed hundreds of members of the community. We advertised that arrest and put the pictures out to say, hey, everyone out there, we got these folks. And then sometimes it's about public interest. If people understand things about policing culture, crime culture, what's going on around them better. And in that particular case, we found that the idea of an intergenerational mother and daughter fentanyl ring was something that the public would be interested in hearing about. That was the bar. It's a matter of discretion. Another one was we put out, a man was taunting us to arrest him on Facebook, and we in fact arrested him. So is there a policy as to what pictures we can put out and when? No, but I did lay out the basic guidelines, which is serious incidents, which the public ought to know about because they are a matter of life safety. Also, incidents that the public has a deep abiding interest in. I mean, another example is an 85-year-old woman, approximately, that was her age, pickpocketed in the Price Chopper. On camera, you see a man reaching into an 85-year-old woman's purse and taking out her wallet. We asked for leads, got a lot of interest in that case. We let people know that we made an arrest and what the status of that person was, right? So very serious, of great public interest. And then there's just general interest, right, which is probably what people want to get more insight into. Like, why do I think that an intergenerational mother and daughter drug dealing team is of interest to the public? Like, I have a hunch, and I could be wrong, but that's my discretion as a chief, and it's lawful to post those things, and it's part of our leadership style.
Yes, I think that's the concern, though. So if one of the factors that you're considering is just kind of public interest, broadly speaking, right, might be some concern that kind of satisfying public interest doesn't necessarily kind of serve the public's interest, right?
Right.
So that people might want information that is not necessarily good for them to have, or that is kind of doesn't serve the interest of the community in kind of relating to other community members that have run afoul of the law.
Right. No, I mean, I think that's thoughtful, and you're right in one sense. Like, we don't want to do, or what we reconsider when it's brought to our attention is, are we like, re-victimizing people or somebody in a vulnerable position, and we're just like putting them out there in a way that is interesting or novel, but like doesn't benefit them or kind of shames them in some way. Like, that's a real, concern, and we're amenable to continuing to think about that, and we do. I mean, we adjust what we put out based on the feedback we get, and it's not a perfect process. But ultimately, I do see it. I strongly stand by it as a matter of discretion informed by feedback, right, and conforming to sensibilities.
So you make that judgment, or who makes that judgment, case by case as it comes along?
Well, I mean, I confer with Laura, with Deputy Chief Murad, with Deputy Chief Wright. And it's, sometimes we have talks with City Hall about that. It depends.
Okay. Next item on the agenda are commendation letters, but I don't think we had any this month.
I have one here that I can just share quickly.
Sure, you could read that. Thanks, Laura.
I guess partly it's what is exactly, it's not directly from the public, it's actually from Winooski Police Department about a incident that both departments responded to. And this is a sergeant writing saying he wanted to let the chief know about the outstanding work of the officers in regards to an attempted suicide. It was a 911 call. Officers arrived from both departments, and this individual was along the bridge. He was in a precarious position, and one of our sergeants and an officer was able to speak with him and get him from this situation and off to the side. And they noted we were very familiar with this man. He has a long history of trauma. And these officers and this sergeant worked very well to get him to a safe place, and they were able to recover this incident without further injury or incidents.
Great.
Can I just follow up on an answer? 'Cause I think it's important. Just to say, we are responsive to, we have some level of self-awareness about like whether we've done something appropriate or not. Like when I spoke with Deputy Chief Murad about putting a photo of us feeding a prisoner for Thanksgiving, it just seemed in one way like to say, it's not common. We don't normally allow food in our cells, but it's Thanksgiving. Here we are feeding a prisoner. People said, we can figure out who this guy is based on what you said about him. It just seems opportunistic. Like there's a point to that. Like if I could do that again, I wouldn't have done that. It's not that we just say it's my discretion. I don't take feedback. That's it. Like that was, something we would have done another way. Another thing to make clear, there's a narrow concern about. People argue that South Burlington stopped posting mugshot photos, so we should not post mugshot photos ever. That's an argument that's come up many times. What South Burlington was doing was systematically posting every mugshot photo of everyone they arrested. That's not what we've ever done and not what we will do. It's about the need to keep the community informed based on those three broad categories. And we could, going from the least subjective to the most, candidly. The very serious incidents that the public ought to know about. Incidents that the public has a great abiding interest in, and then incidents that we think they'd be interested in, right? And sometimes we don't put mugshots. We did not, on our social media, post the mugshots of the 6 people arrested in relation to the homicide. I just didn't think, I thought they were all over the news. I thought that the words spoke for themselves, and I thought, we will let the court system play out, but it was the news that asked for the mugshots and put them up in that case. So it's not like a hard and fast rule about that, too. We try to have some sensitivity and discretion.
The next item on our agenda is regarding open meeting laws. And we put this on the agenda so we could have a discussion as commissioners to make sure that we're really clear about what they mean. And actually, we have City Attorney Eileen Blackwood here to answer any questions that we might have. But as a commission, we have been receiving emails from citizens that are emailing us as a total commission. And I was very concerned about us engaging in that with the whole commission CC'd. So I got in touch with the city attorney office, and I received feedback from Nick Lopez. And I just want to read this to you and then see if we have any questions, just so that as a commission we understand what the law is and we make sure that we are abiding by the law. So Nick says, the open meeting law applies to all gatherings of a quorum of the members of the commission for the purpose of discussing the business of the commission or the purpose of taking action. This includes electronic communications like email. The only time when the open meeting law does not apply when a quorum of commission members is communicating is at social gatherings, conventions, conferences, training programs, press conferences, media events, or where there's no business of the commission is discussed. It would appear to me that the communications you referenced in your email appear to be business of the public body, and if communicated to a quorum of the commission, these discussions need to happen in a publicly noticed meeting of the commission. So we've all been emailed, and I believe, based on this, that we need to either engage the individual outside of that email, coffee, email personally, or invite them to come to the commission meeting and address us as a commission. So
I have questions. Okay, so first question is, if someone asks me an opinion, asks for my opinion about some matter which faces the commission, and I give them my opinion as an individual, is it your understanding based on that email that violates the open meeting law?
Well, I'm going to give you my opinion, and I'm going to refer to the city attorney. Based on my understanding is, absolutely you can give your opinion, but the whole commission should not be CC'd on it, because you can engage and we can have conversations with any individual anytime. But as a quorum, that's commission business being discussed. So
that's correct. The issue is that you can't give your opinion and copy everybody else on the commission, because then you're turning it into a commission discussion.
Is it that people can't know about it, people can't discuss it? Right, so it seems to me as though communicating my opinion about something is not taking any commission, is not resolving commission business. Is that correct?
There's an argument to that. I mean, I understand your argument. We've gone back and forth with the Secretary of State's office around how they're going to look at that, and Secretary of State's office has pretty much said, look, if somebody communicates with you to the whole commission, and one of you communicates back to them, to the whole commission, with an opinion, something substantive about it, other than just something that is really like, you can get more information here, or come to our meeting, or something like that. That the problem is that you are then kind of inviting a discussion. So we recommend to all the boards and commissions in the city that you not copy everybody on the commission when you respond. You can copy everybody and say, I'm going to respond separately to this person. If you want an individual copy, you can certainly send it to people individually. It's the idea is not to replace a meeting with email conversation.
Right, no, that's understood. So let's suppose, as has been the case in some of the cases we're discussing right now, suppose it's the case that an email is kind of prefaced with a disclaimer that says, this is my opinion, it's not intended to resolve any commission business, right? It's not intended to satisfy any of the issues that face the commission at the next meeting, but this is what I think right now, and commissioners are copied in order to indicate that this person's has been replied to in this way.
That still sounds to me like that is too close to being and inviting a discussion of the commission, because you're inviting all the other commissioners to interact on this as a group.
Can I ask about the inviting a discussion clause? So it seems as though you're inviting a discussion if if it's understood by the commissioners that they respond to it, right? So if it's understood by the commission that that people who are offering their opinions, people that ask for opinions, are not to be responded to or engaged with in those discussions.
I think the problem is you're communicating something that's substantive to all the commissioners. Like, that's a discussion. Nobody has to respond back to you for it to be part of a meeting, or we've used the word discussion, but there's nothing in the law that says discussion.
Right.
So you're communicating an idea that you're giving to every one of the commissioners as a group. That sounds like something that needs to happen at a meeting.
So commission business, right? It's not merely the stating of opinions. The commission business is going to be resolving commission business in some formal way, correct?
No. Anything, and that's one of the hard things that came up around this is that if you all show up in a place together and all get together and you're starting to talk about a topic that is something that may come before the commission, even if you're talking about your personal opinion, that's still part of the commission business, because the commission, at a meeting, you're going to be talking about your personal opinion as well.
And the other thing is, it does invite, and this has been the case where an opinion is stated, but then the person responds back and everybody's copied. So it really feels like it should be discussed so that the public can have access to that discussion.
So I'll follow up with you about this. I'm still, I'll say, either confused or not convinced. So I'll follow up with you about this later on. Yeah.
Okay. I would like to. I know you're going to follow up, but in the meantime, until we get maybe something different, I'd like to really encourage all of us to be sensitive to this. I mean, we represent the public. I feel like that open meeting law is there for a reason, and if a citizen's going to engage us with, I think you can have up to 3 people, right? Less than a quorum, right? Then that's great. But I don't want, in my opinion, we should respect that law and not have these discussions happen offline on an email where there's a lot of back and forth on some things that are really commission business. I believe the public should have access to that discussion. So, and it's not just my belief, that's the
law.
It's the law.
You're stating what the law is.
And for a good reason, so that the public can have access to them.
Some of the exceptions are things like things which are being added for committee discussion, right? So, for example, emails that say this will be discussed at the next meeting.
Absolutely.
Those are fine.
Yeah, yeah. Here's a document, read it so we can discuss it at the meeting.
Right, so I'll follow up later.
Okay. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that before we move on? No? Okay.
Could you also, by the way, could you forward the email that you got from the assistant attorney to us?
Sure.
Thank you. And in the future, could you forward those prior to meetings?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner updates and comments? Anybody have? Anything? We've been sort of been commenting and
Yeah.
asking questions along the way. Okay. Consent agenda. Does anybody have any changes that they'd like to propose for the, from the minutes from the previous meeting? And if not, could I have a motion to accept them?
So moved.
Yeah.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next meeting agenda items. I have one, and that is to revisit and relook at the changes, the very minor changes, but the changes made to the role of the Burlington Police Commission in reviewing complaints against police officers. When Peter and I went to the Public Safety Committee meeting, they had two small changes that we needed to make. I just got this back today, so there's not enough time for us to get it in the agenda to actually look at it and vote on it. So I will forward this to all the commissioners, so you can take a look at it and we can vote on it and discuss and vote on it in the next meeting.
Is that use of force policy draft, you think that'll be something that'll be ready for the next meeting?
That, there should be some change. It's possible that some alterations or edits would be ready by the next meeting. And if any case, it would be suitable to have it as an agenda item, right? There are certain things I think that we could add sooner rather than later, so it's possible.
I would ask that we put on the agenda just an update on the city's social media policy to see what the status of that is, so we can then have our discussion of whether we feel like we need to do anything beyond that.
Okay? And one last thing, that I have anyway, is the annual report is due to
Right.
City Council on
Right.
May 31st.
Right.
Shireen has graciously agreed to create a draft for us to review, and we should probably review that at the next meeting.
Yes, so I'll make sure it gets circulated in advance, and it would be great if I can get it to you in time that you can, email me directly with questions or concerns so that we are ready to vote on it at the May meeting. So I will endeavor to get that done within the next 2 weeks and get it out to you with time.
The May meeting date is DC Wright and the chief are both at PERF, an annual conference. They leave that morning, that Tuesday morning. So an alternative would be the 27th, which is the Monday, or the 4th, which would not work well with the annual report if that needs to be in by the 31st.
It is important to, I think at this time too, June, I will be on vacation. I have never taken a full week's vacation since I got here, and you will not stop me from taking vacation in June. The city, even if Godzilla came to the city, I'd have to call in from Maine and give instructions.
Do you know what
June.
week that is?
That's the last week of June, yeah. So, but I would like to see if there's an alternative to.
So
May.
that's the 25th, which is our June meeting, so I don't know.
Okay, so we have to move
We
both?
could try to move them both so they're equally spaced. We could, I think we can.
And thank you for,
One.
yeah.
Can I ask, Attorney Blackwood, on the annual report due May 31st, how hard and fast is that rule? Not rule, but expectation?
You try to get close, how's that?
Yeah, okay. I mean, look, we've done far worse. It would be nice to get it in by May, but I don't want us to sacrifice the quality of the report if we can't get it by then.
Well, we can always get in touch with Counselor Wright and let him know as far as our
Right.
timing of our meeting,
Right.
if we decide. So,
Does the Monday work before? Is there a reason we can't do it Monday?
I can.
I can.
Wait, Helen? It's Memorial Day, just.
yeah,
Oh,
I
that day.
can't.
Okay, sorry, bad idea. Yeah, the 29th, they're out, the 28th through, I think, the 31st.
What about Monday, June 3rd? Chief, are you still here?
June
If
3rd?
Tuesday doesn't work.
Monday, June 3rd, I'm sorry.
Yes.
That should, yeah, that's, ooh, let me see.
is a city council meeting.
No pressure.
What about the 4th? Did we decide the 4th didn't?
I
Do
should,
the
Monday,
fourth.
June 3rd seems fine.
Or there's a city, or the 4th?
The 4th is fine as well.
Fourth makes more sense. There's city council Monday.
Okay.
We were only
Tuesday,
thinking
June
Monday.
4th, you're saying?
Yep.
Thank you for being flexible. That would be fine.
And what I'm gonna do is I will get in touch with Counselor Wright and let him know why it won't be there by May
Okay.
31st.
All right, great, thank you.
And then, do you wanna just worry about what would be the June meeting then?
Thank you, everyone.
So the June meeting could be June 25th, though.
Well-
That's when the chief is gone.
Oh,
Yeah.
the chief is gone, right.
Yeah, but I mean, there are other deputy chiefs who can conduct the meeting.
Okay.
They look excited about it. Maybe we could text them.
Okay, so we've got next meeting? Yeah, Jim?
Yeah, well, while Attorney Blackwood is here, back to the social media policy. There was a question earlier, and it just popped into my head. So, your understanding when a city does adopt the policy, is there, in your opinion, do we as a department and as a commission have some authority to add to that, to meet certain needs that we may see unique here, or is that sacrosanct
It
to?
probably depends. It probably depends if there are places where there's a department-specific need that is not contrary in some way to the policy, then probably you can add to it. You can also give input on the policy, so when it gets circulated, before it gets approved by the city council or whatever process it's going through. For example, the part that deals with employees goes through the Human Resources Committee first and then goes to the city council. There are opportunities that it's publicly available on board docs that you could make comments on as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, I believe that we do need to go into executive session. Anybody want to make a motion?
Disciplinary actions that you want to
Personnel
move.
matters, personnel matters.
Yeah.
Personnel matters.
Discuss personnel matters.
So can I
I'll
have a
move it, I'll
motion?
move it.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Move second.
We will move into executive session. And thank you again for everybody who came out tonight.